And I'm starting this recording where I left off the other one. It's 2:30 in the morning-ish. It might have been 3. Tristan called an ambulance and they ask him lots of questions about my symptoms, including, whether I can lift my arms and if I can lift them to the same height, which I could. I lifted both of them to the same height. I was alert and could talk. There was no impairments to my speech, which they asked about. They asked me to smile. I smiled fine. There was no drooping on either side of my face. Because it is weekend, night from Saturday to Sunday, the ambulance and paramedics were all very, very busy. So it was not a priority to come and see me based on my symptoms. And Tristan was just told to monitor me, to call back if I got worse. And I lied there with the room spinning and vomiting for over 3 hours before the ambulance arrived. And the whole time Tristan sat there watching me, looking after me, checking me, not knowing what was happening. Every time I vomited, I would vomit like 15 to 20 times. And maybe I vomited every 10 minutes. I vomited many hundred times through those hours. And the paramedics arrived and they diagnosed me with vertigo. They wanted me to try and get up. Did not have a chance. I could not, to save my life. If the house had been on fire, I would have died. I could not coordinate my body to crawl out of there. I tried to drag myself across the floor. I did not have a chance. Due to the way our house is built, they couldn't really get the stretcher into the house, so they had to call another ambulance to come over, and the 4 of them carried me out of the house on a sheet and then drove me to hospital. Due to COVID restrictions, Tristan was not allowed to come with, so I went alone. And when I arrived at the hospital, I knew even more so that something was horribly, horribly wrong, because when they took the stretcher with me on it out of the ambulance, I was lying on my back, a little bit tilted to the left because I felt like I was getting pulled towards the left. And my head was sideways, pointed to the side. And I don't know how to describe this, but when you are sitting upright, when we humans are sitting upright, we see the world and we know that we are upright. If you tilt your head and you see the world sideways, you know that the world is still the right way and that it's your head that's sideways. It's very hard to explain, but at that point, when my head was tilted to the left, it felt for me like that's the orientation of the world. That's what felt right for me. If I moved my head upright, I felt like when we normally tilt our head to the side. I saw the world sideways. The sideways world was my reality. And it was terrifying. And they ran blood tests. They found that I had low phosphate. They gave me IV phosphate. And by that time as well, they'd given me 3 injections to stop me vomiting before the vomiting stopped. And eventually the spinning stopped, the world orientation went back to normal, and I was fatigued more than anything. And the Tristan had called the ambulance around 2:33. They showed up around 3 hours later, around 5:30, I think, and left our place around 6 in the morning. And I got to the hospital, I don't know, 6:30 or something. I don't really remember, but I know that I was in hospital for probably less than 8 hours. I was home again, back with Tristan before 3 o'clock that afternoon. No scans had been done, only blood tests. They diagnosed me with vertigo. One of the paramedics, the lead paramedic, said it was the worst vertigo she'd ever seen. And yet no scans were done. At the time, I was so worn out, I didn't question it. When I arrived at the hospital, I was seen by one doctor, and then there was a handover and another doctor, and I think there was a third doctor involved before I was sent home. I trusted that they knew what they were doing, that if there was valid reason for concerns, they would have done more scans. And they told me to go home and to later in the week check up with the doctor and to maybe have an MRI just to be sure. I went home and was just very, very, very fatigued, and went back to the doctor on the Wednesday, on the 27th. He at that time didn't know that I'd been to the hospital over the weekend, but he said the blood tests that I'd taken on the Friday had come back and they were fine. Absolutely everything was fine. But the blood test had ruled out me having a clot from AstraZeneca. I showed him my discharge papers from being at the hospital and explained to him what had happened over the weekend. And that I had very low phosphate. It turns out that low phosphate can happen when you're not getting enough oxygen. So it's likely that I had low phosphate due to all the vomiting, because I had low levels. Yet the doctor was not concerned. He stated, "Are you all right now?" And I was better than I had been for a week. And he said we can follow up with new blood tests in a couple of weeks just to be sure. And I mentioned to him that they had at the hospital mentioned that it might be a good idea to get an MRI just to be sure. Then he looked at the papers again, because it was written in the papers. And he said, I can give you a referral for an MRI just to reassure you, to make you feel better. I had called to book an MRI before I even got home after that doctor's visit. I did it in the parking lot at the doctor's office. And they were going to book me in the week after. And I said to them, I live just down the street from where you guys are located. Like, just let me know if anyone cancels or you can get me in. And while I was still on the phone with them, they said they could actually squeeze me in very first thing on the Friday. So Thursday, 28, I worked from home full day. Felt weird and off, but And then on the 29th, I was going for the MRI in the morning, and then I was supposed to come home and keep working from home. Yeah. I went in for the MRI and they told me it would take 20, 25-ish minutes. And I came out of the machine and saw on the clock that I'd been in there for 45 minutes. By that time, I so desperately needed to pee that I didn't even think of it. But when I went to go for the bathrooms, I went to the room to grab my things to get clothes, like my jewelry and whatnot again. And that locker is in the same room where they had all the screens. And they grabbed all my stuff and rushed out of there, which confused me because I just thought it would take me less than a minute, like half a minute, to grab my stuff right here. They rushed me out of there and said, come here, get dressed, like all your stuff's over here. And I'm like, no, I need the bathroom. So I just like started heading towards that, and they're like, no, you need to come here. And I'm like, no, I need the toilet. I went to the toilet. And they were like, just wait here, don't go anywhere. The person looking at your scans is going to come and have a chat with you. And I thought that is really, really weird because I've had many scans of various things in my life and you never get the results the same day. And I just sat there waiting, and then I hear a man across the hall in a room pick up the phone, ask to speak to Dr. Such and Such, which was the doctor that had referred me. And I was not supposed to hear that phone call, but he had his door wide open. I didn't hear what he said, but I heard him say, I'm calling about 30-year-old female such and such, MRI, blah, blah, blah. She can definitely not drive. Yes, hospital. That was all I heard. I knew there was something. I didn't know what. Tristan was not allowed to come with me to the MRI due to COVID restrictions, but I messaged him and said, can you come here, please? I'm listening to a conversation I'm not supposed to be hearing, but there's something. Shortly after, the man that had been on the phone came out and told me I've had a stroke. Because we lived just down the road, Tristan had arrived like a minute or two after I was told that I've had a stroke. We had a million questions and they couldn't answer any of them other than you've had a stroke. Am I still having a stroke? Don't know. Any other questions or details? Don't know. We were told to go straight to hospital. And the Dean Hospital, I guess, is a story of its own, which I will cover in the next recording.